Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking some time to hang out with us here this afternoon. My name is Ryan Raku. I'm a part of the team here at Northspyre, and I'm so excited to be speaking to you today about using Northspyre for proactive development management. Before we get into it, we'll kind of have a brief outline of what we're going to talk about today. So just agenda for today, we'll have a little bit of an introduction, talk about some key learning objectives that we hope you'll be able to walk away with at the end of this webinar. We'll get into the tool and we'll take a look at how Northspyre allows you to be proactive from the very beginning of a project all the way into the pre-development stage, then getting into development and construction. We'll sort of wrap things up, and then time permitting, we'll try to leave some space at the end for any questions, but if you have questions and we can't get to them, be sure to follow up with you on those. Before we get into it, I do want to emphasize, and you see it here on screen, that Northspyre is here to support me. We've got a ton of resources. This is, kind of a small sliver of that, but we've got a ton of resources available to make sure that we're giving you the most value possible and getting you everything that you need. And that's everything from personalized support from your real estate transformation consultants like myself. We also have a concierge help desk that you can email directly. That's concierge@northspyre.com. And they've got a very quick turnaround time. Should be able to get back to you within a few minutes. And then lastly, we have our knowledge base. This is a really great resource. We've got over 300, about 350 articles there in the knowledge base. Really great articles covering virtually everything that you can think of in the platform. Really great how-tos to find the information that you need pretty quickly. And like I mentioned, this webinar is part of a larger series of webinars that we're doing and part of the resources that we want to make available to you to make sure we're getting you the value that you need. So you see some there on the screen. If you're interested in any of these upcoming webinars, certainly encourage you to connect with us, get registered to be able to attend those as well. And then luckily, if you missed any, we think about that too. And we have all the past webinars, we save the recordings in that knowledge base. And so if you go over to the knowledge base and you search webinars, you'll be able to see everything that we've covered so far. I'd certainly encourage you to do that. All right, now bringing it back to today, some key learning objectives, key takeaways we want you to be able to leave here with as we cover this topic, again, of proactive development management using Northspyre. I want you to walk away with the ability to leverage both your current and your historical project data for a more proactive approach to planning those development projects, a comprehensive understanding of Northspyre's early warning system and how it can aid in proactive decision-making during the development process, and then the ability to effectively track, manage, and mitigate any potential risks and ultimately reduce those, thereby increasing your returns on these projects. Now, as we get into things here, I want to sort of set the table by telling a little bit of a story. So prior to coming to Northspyre, I worked for a developer. I worked for a multifamily developer. And like many of the other shops out there in the space, we were using Excel to manage our development projects. We would use the draw spreadsheet as a gauge on where things stood currently. And then we had separate Excel spreadsheets to track things like hard costs and potential costs, and even see how we were doing with our vendors. It was all separate. And with this method, it worked okay. Maybe some of you have experienced this type of setup. It worked okay, but we didn't really have good visibility over the projects. We'd run projections, which was yet another spreadsheet and a pretty manual process to put together, right? Reconciling this information from all these different sources, fixing broken formulas and doing these different things. It was about a 3 to 4 hour process, if you can believe it, just to run a projection for a project and pull all the information together. And so because of the lift required, we'd only do that about every 3 or 4 months. And so I recall a point in time when I was in this role, had a few active projects going, and 3 of my projects were sort of at the height of their activity. And so got to the point in time of running projections on these different projects, and after spending, about 12 hours combined, about 4 hours per project, 12 hours combined to pull these projections together, what I found was that we were $1 million to the bad, over $1 million to the bad, not versus our budget, but compared to the last time we had done projections, because so much had transpired in that time. Now, none of those things were brand new. We were talking about things as they were coming in. We were having meetings. We had all of our different spreadsheets to track all the different things. But without a comprehensive view of everything that was going on and how it was shaping up, we didn't really have good visibility. And it put us in a really reactive position. Most of these costs, by the time we'd figured this out, had already been incurred or at least committed to. And if we were aware of these things ahead of time, we likely could have mitigated a lot of that risk and a lot of those overruns. And certainly, we would have been in a better position to communicate these issues with our partners. And I'll admit that was sort of at the height of COVID. And so cost overruns were, everywhere, you name it. I'm sure some of the folks in the audience have experienced that and lived through that. But as much as that might sound like a unique experience and a unique case, we recognize that many developers find themselves in similar situations today, not having the desired visibility and control they'd like to have over their development projects, causing them to take a more reactive approach and ultimately put their profits at risk. And Northspyre, our goal is to empower development teams like yours to take a proactive, forward-looking approach, allowing you to achieve more predictable outcomes on your development projects. And in the platform, this starts as soon as you start a new project in the system, and from day one in our early budget planning tool. So we'll get out of the slides here, we'll go into Northspyre, and we'll take a look at what we're talking about there. So if you're not familiar with this tool, the Early Budget Planner allows teams to plan new developments from that initial conception, right, from that day one or even maybe day zero, depending on how you look at it, all the way through that early due diligence and ultimately finalizing the budget. And today, you might be managing this in Excel. You start a new project, you set up a new budget. Maybe you've got to pull up information from all these different sources, right? Pull up Excel files for old projects and other projects, and then you copy paste that information over to your new Excel and kind of massage it and move it around to line up with what you're trying to do. Or, maybe you only really dial in the budget when you start getting some contracts and some costs coming in, but you don't really have a good sense of what things are going to look like before that. Well, with Northspyre, you can easily access a historical database of all of your past projects, along with information from your current projects, to ensure that you create a development budget with the highest degree of accuracy, ultimately helping you mitigate cost overruns later on. You understand there's some key drivers to cost overruns, and one of the biggest ones is not really having the most dialed in budget when you start things out. That's going to lead to sort of missed things that you have to pay for later on. And so we give you the ability to manage all of that pretty gracefully in the platform, and we'll take a look at what that looks like. So if I click over here, again, this is a sort of brand new project. It's in this early budget planning stage. The first thing I'll point out is these different budget scenarios. And so going back to the example again, maybe today you're doing this in Excel, you've got kind of a column for your initial pro forma that's also rough per square foot numbers. Again, maybe you copied and pasted those from other places. And then we understand that you sort of flesh that budget out as new information comes in, as you put things out to the street and start getting bids and whatever else the case may be. You get permit information from the city, all that good stuff. And so that budget sort of evolves over time. Well, now instead of having one record of that, or maybe, having a new spreadsheet every time you'd have to make an update like that, here in Northspyre, you can run multiple budget scenarios side by side, and you can see how that budget is getting fleshed out over time as you dial in those different costs. You can run up to 10 of these budget scenarios, see them all together, and again, be able to understand how things are playing out. But the other thing that I'll point out, again, maybe you're doing this today in an Excel, and it's a lot of manually referencing other things and copying and pasting and all that good stuff. in Northspyre, I don't need to leave this screen to understand, maybe I'm trying to figure out this architecture line. Maybe I want to update this and I want to understand, gosh, I'm thinking of this other project that's similar to this one. What did I spend on architecture over there? Or maybe it's a little more big picture. Man, what am I spending on average on architecture across all of my projects or on this particular subset of my projects? Well, we can do that really, really easily and fluently in Northspyre right from this view. So I click in here and I go to add some new budget information. Here's where I can enter the dollar amount. So if I know this is, 200,000, 500,000, whatever it is, I can enter that right here. But I can also, if you notice this little chart icon to the right, and as I hover over it, it says find recommended values. So I click on this. It's going to access two key pieces of information. Number one, it's pulling in data from all of my projects. So again, in the example of, man, I'm thinking of this other project. It's pretty similar to this one. I wonder what I spent on architecture over there. I can just come right here, click into projects, select a particular project, go to that budget line and understand on that particular budget line. And again, you're seeing some sample data here, so I don't necessarily get caught on the dollars and cents, but on that specific budget line, here's what I spent overall, or if it's an active project, here's what I'm forecasted to spend. And I can bring in that total amount, or I can bring it in on a per square foot basis and have it adjust kind of pro rata to my new project here. So we make it really easy to access that information. Now you can also, like I said, maybe I'm thinking more globally, what am I spending across the board on architecture? Well, I can come here to my cost analytics and be able to see that pretty easily for all these different types of costs. So again, make it really, really simple to not have to leave the platform, not have to have, the tools set up in two different windows or anything crazy like that. You've got one source of information and you can quickly access data across your entire portfolio to really inform that initial budget. Now, another tool that you have access to as soon as you start a new project in the system is our cash flows tool. And this is a really powerful tool. We'll get there by going to Power Tools, Cash Flows. And it's a powerful tool in, an active development project, but even in that early stage, really powerful to be able to project out, what this spend is forecasted to look like, how this project is going to play out. Now, when you're in that early budget planning stage, pre-development stage, one of the nice things about the cash flow tool is that we can bring in all of your different budget scenarios. So if I wanted to understand how is this particular scenario going to play out and how does that look against this other scenario that, we might end up going with. And you can see all the information up top changes, all the visuals change, all my data down here. If I click this little table view, I've got the actual dollars and cents of how this spend is projected to flow over the course of this job. And so it's a really, really proactive tool. It uses your budget and a few other factors to make these projections. And ultimately, it's going to empower highly effective real estate teams and project leads to be proactive and explore the possibilities of what might happen in the future instead of simply ending up in a position where you've got to explain what happened in the past. And so some really powerful tools in the system, again, from day one out of the box, as soon as you're setting up that initial project. And all of this comes together to make sure that you set your project up in the best way possible. But we understand as information starts flowing in, it can be kind of tough to keep track of those things. One of the things we found is that even teams with good processes in the development stage sometimes struggle to track all those pre-development costs and then see how that carries over once they're in development. And so Northspyre gives you a real clean, easy way to keep track of all those things and also to have the forward-looking insights that you want to have as information comes in. And we do that through our Copilot analytics. And so to get over there, we're going to go to our data inbox. Now, if you're not familiar with this tool, when new invoices come into the system, they first come into the data inbox. Pretty advanced tool This tool eliminates a lot of the manual data entry that teams are often sort of bogged down with as they're cataloging and saving all these new invoices. And so it takes that away, and in its place, it sort of frees you up to look at the information through that higher level, analytical, forward-looking lens. And that lens is really the Copilot analytics tool that we'll take a look at here in a second. And this is a great tool, if you're in pre-development, but also carries through to development. So if I flip over here, this is a project that is in the development stage. Our budget's been finalized, but just to show you, so I go to this data inbox, it's going to look exactly the same. All of our invoices come in here. And as I click on this, click on an invoice as an example, what you'll notice is that the system has sort of teed this up. No one had to come in here and enter this information manually. It's all done for us automatically and kind of frees us up to, again, really evaluate the information that you're seeing. Now, instead of becoming aware of overbilling, once it's already occurred, you can now see any risks that each invoice presents before accepting it into the project. And so let's take a look at what that looks like. Again, we're looking at our invoice here. We see that all the pertinent details are pulled together for us, and we can just look at this, make sure we're good with everything and accept it. But as we look at the top, I'll see that I have this little red warning with my Copilot analytics. It's giving me a summary here and telling me you have one conflict. As I go over to the Copilot Analytics tab, what you'll see is that because Northspyre is holding all your information in the same place, right? We're not siloed to where you've got your invoices in one spreadsheet and your contracts in another spreadsheet, maybe your master budget in something else. We've got everything in one place, and it's being updated for us automatically. When this information comes in, Northspyre can take this invoice and it can compare it to my budget. It can compare it to the contract or contracts that I have with this particular vendor. And it can even compare it to the source that may be responsible for paying this type of cost. So as I scroll down here through the Copilot Analytics, you'll see the system's warning me, hey, you're not necessarily slated to run over budget, but this particular invoice is going to zero out your budget. So we want you to be aware of that. That's number one. Number two, as I come down to my vendor impact, you can see that I have about 4250 in approved contracts with this particular vendor. Now, this invoice is only $19.50, and so if I had sort of a limited view, maybe in the back of my mind, I know what my contract is, I'm looking at my invoice and I'm thinking I'm okay, but I've already approved some invoices for this vendor. And so because of that, when this comes in, it's going to push me over budget. Now, again, I haven't accepted this invoice yet, but I have all of these insights sort of at the ready for me to easily digest and kind of make decisions. And so I can look at this and say, maybe I'm okay with this and we just need to reallocate some funds. Maybe I'm not okay with this and I need to have a conversation with this vendor. But Northspyre gives you the information to do that, again, ahead of time before you actually accept the information into the project. So now that we've taken a look at, how Northspyre helps you in that pre-development stage, let's take a look at how it's able to help us in the development stage, proactively managing our projects using our anticipated cost report. So again, I happen to be in a project that's already in that development stage. We've got a finalized budget. This is a real project. And as I click over here, I'll get this anticipated cost report view. You may be familiar with this. Maybe it's something you've glanced at, but you don't really fully understand the full power behind this page. This is arguably one of the most, if not the most important pages or resources in the system. The anticipated cost report is Northspyre's sort of primary decision-making tool. It is your early warning system or early warning tool, and it empowers highly effective teams to see exactly where things stand today, but also to proactively forecast any risks and opportunities on their projects ahead of time. So going back to my little story at the beginning, we, like many other groups out there, I'm sure, we're using the draw spreadsheet as a gauge of where things stood. Well, number one, information is flowing constantly. So by the time I'm looking at that draw spreadsheet, it's probably a little stale. There's probably some new costs that are being accounted for there. But more importantly, that draw spreadsheet only told me what happened in the past. And again, we have separate spreadsheets to keep track of hard costs and exposures and all these different things. But without that comprehensive view of how it was all coming together, we lack the needed visibility. And in our case, we ultimately took a hit because of that. With Northspyre, you never have to be in that position, kind of managing your projects from the back foot, being reactive, and working with really incomplete information. With this anticipated cost report, you can clearly see cost overruns before they occur, allowing you to strategically manage those risks, keep the project on track, and ultimately maximize your returns. So let's take a look at how it works. The first thing you'll notice when we look at the page is we have these really nice summary tiles at the top. And this is a theme that you'll see more and more throughout the system. We want to be able to give you the critical information that you need to make decisions quickly. And so we try to have that front and center, easily digestible. I can understand my full forecasted costs. We'll come back to that concept in a second. My variances, how my contingencies do, and all these different things. And again, we'll come back to this a little more in depth in a second here, but some pretty key insights right here at the top. As we scroll down, we've got a lot more detail. We've got visibility into our entire development budget, inclusive of any approved changes to the budget and reallocations that we've made, and then ultimately kind of what we're working with today in terms of the budget. We've got visibility on all of our contracts, our change orders, and even any potential costs or exposures that might increase those contract values. Over here to the right, we've got a full record of all of our spend or our invoiced to date. And again, all of this information is being updated for us in real time as information comes into the data inbox. We look at it, we accept it. All of this gets updated for us automatically. And then further out to the right, we've got these balances remaining. And so we have a really good picture, a really accurate picture in real time as to where things stand today. But here's kind of the magic of this anticipated cost report. Over here in the middle, and I skipped over this section intentionally, we've got this anticipated cost section. And in this section, we have the total anticipated cost. What this is a forecasted cost of where we are going to end up at the end of this job. And again, this is being updated for us in real time. This is making this projection based on your budget, based on your contract and change order values, based on any exposures, based on your invoices and your spend to date. It's looking at all these variables, updating in real time and constantly showing us, hey, here's where you are forecasted to end up at the end of this job. And because of that, maybe I'm looking at my budget here and I'm looking at this architect of record line item. And, today I've got a budget of $627,000 and I've drawn down, or I've spent about $365,000. And so if I were looking at a draw, we'd be in great shape. We've spent maybe a little more than half, about half of what our budget is. We've got room on the budget. We're in good shape. But because Northspyre is looking out into the future, always forecasting what those potential risks are going to be, the system's able to tell us, well, hey, you're in great shape today, but you've got a contract of $859,000. And by the way, you've got exposures of $92,500. And so your anticipated cost, where we see you ending up at the end of this job on this particular budget line, is $951,000. And because of your $627,000 budget, you're about $325,000 over. Do you want to do something about that? You need to have a conversation with the architect. You need to reduce some of those change orders, do some value engineering, whatever you need to do. You have the ability to do it because we haven't necessarily incurred that cost yet. We're just looking out into the future. And as I look through my entire budget, you see all these red variances here that's showing us that we're over on one budget line or another. And you can see how this all comes together. We've got some totals, at the very bottom of the page, but if we scroll back up to the top to our summary tiles that I mentioned, in the aggregate, I'm about $1 million over budget on this project. Now, I've got 2.5 million in contingency, so maybe I'm okay, but I'm only 17% into my project. Do I really want half of my contingency roughly to be spoken for at 17% in? Maybe that's okay, maybe it's not, but I have the information I need to proactively make those decisions far out in advance, as opposed to being 50, 60, 80% into this job, incurring those cost overruns, and then reacting to that information. And so that is how all of this information comes together and allows you to look forward and mitigate those risks. Now, maybe I'm looking at this page and, going back to our example with the architect, maybe I have a question about that. Maybe I want to understand, what is this particular spend? How did this get here? Maybe I want to understand how this particular vendor is doing. And I've got this large contract and these exposures, and I'm looking at my budget. I'm saying, wait a second, how is this vendor performing? Are they already over their contract value? What's going on with them? Well, we give you the ability to track that really nicely and cleanly using our project vendor overview page. And so we can get there just by clicking on the vendor here, or I can go to Power Tools, Project Vendor Overview. And so this page is going to give you a global look at everything happening with a given vendor in real time and immediate analysis of all that information. And so before, maybe you're tracking this in Excel, you've got separate spreadsheets for all your different vendors, or maybe you've got one monster of a spreadsheet, right? A 30, 40 tab spreadsheet with all your vendor information. Maybe you've got a tab for all your contracts and then separately any change orders or potential costs or whatever it is. Or maybe because that's just way too much work, way too much of a lift, you don't really keep track of all your vendors, making it more likely that they're going to run over their commitment because we're not keeping track and visibility on that. With Northspyre, all that's done for you automatically. You have all the information that you need at your fingertips so you can easily answer any questions and ensure that every vendor stays on track. So as we look at the page, similar to the page we were on previously, we've got these really nice summary tiles at the top, again, trying to give you the key information that you need very quickly. So I can see right here, I've got my approved contract of about $436,000. I've spent about $363, and so I've got 72 remaining. So we're in good shape. We're about 83% through our contract with this particular vendor. I can see how the spend is played out over time. And as I scroll down here, you'll notice I have a full catalog of anything that's related to this vendor. So all of my contracts and change orders, any exposures that this vendor would be responsible for, and certainly all the invoices that they've sent in. I've got all of that compiled in one place by vendor for all of my vendors. So I can easily look at this information and make the decisions that I need to make pretty quickly. Now, one thing that's highlighted here is, again, we've got your commitments, we've got your spend to date. We also have these exposures. We understand that tracking exposures is one of the most critical aspects of development, right? Things rarely go according to plan. I mean, obviously, they probably never go according to plan in the world of real estate development. And so the ability to proactively track any unforeseen issues could be the difference between, meeting your projected returns or just barely being profitable or even taking a loss. And so we want to have good control and visibility and understand what those exposures look like. And as much as we're seeing them here per vendor, Northspyre gives you a really nice global view of all of that information through our commitment and potential cost index. And so we can get there, going back through the Power Tools. We go to Power Tools, have all my different indexes over here, and I can click on the commitments and potential cost index. And so again, as we load up the page, this page is going to provide a comprehensive view of all of the contracts, all of the change orders, and certainly all of the exposures or potential costs on this particular project. And again, rather than managing this information in yet another sort of siloed spreadsheet, or having to sort through a number of files in a share folder or a few old emails or whatever the case may be to answer a question that you need to answer, Northspyre gives you a really clean, concise record of all this information, very easily searchable view so that you can quickly find what you need and proactively make decisions. So again, as we look at the page, got some summary tabs at the top here, giving you the key information that you need. And this in particular, I want to circle back to this in a second. But as I come down here to my exposures, again, this is going to show me my exposures across the entire project. And you can imagine, as you get into the project, maybe you have a lot of these, you want to sort of sort and filter this information pretty easily, give you the ability to do that right here. So maybe I want to understand in the aggregate, my full exposure on this job, or maybe I want to understand by a particular vendor, or, within a certain budget line, what my exposure is. I have the ability to really drill down and do that pretty quickly. I can use multiple filters and I can get the information that I need pretty quickly. One of the other nice things about this tool is that as you enter exposures into the system, we give you the ability to enter a cause for that exposure. And as that rolls up, it's a really nice feature to understand in this case that we're looking at here, of my about 270,000 that I have in exposures, how much of that is due to GC errors? How much of that is due to scope gaps? How much of this is due to things that I might need to go back and have a conversation with my team about, versus how much is genuinely due to unforeseen conditions, or how much is due to some positive things, maybe some changes that we as the owners and developers elected to make. You have good visibility on all of that, and you can see quickly here, of, again, this 270,000, about 26% of that was due to errors and omissions. A little bit less than that due to some construction errors. And so these are things that I want to have visibility on to keep in mind, so that, number one, I can sort of keep these vendors in line and keep these costs in line and have good visibility on these exposures and what's driving these exposures as they happen and before they really materialize into change orders. But also, as I think about the next project, and I think about using the same GC and this same set of vendors, I can go back in time and say, well, we had a good few exposures and a good few change orders on that last project. What drove those? And I can come in here and see that pretty quickly and easily. And, when those do get flipped over to change orders, I've got the same level of visibility. Got my base contracts and change orders here, but I can filter pretty easily down to just my change orders, and then ultimately see how many of those were due to these different causes. So to kind of wrap up what we've looked at here, I think I'll maybe end with another story. Several months ago, I was visiting another Northspyre customer near the end of one of their projects. Now, they had just started using the platform. The project we were taking a look at didn't really run on Northspyre. And so they were kind of doing the old school way, managing that in Excel and just using a cornucopia of spreadsheets and files in different places and all the good stuff that we're all used to, right? And they had a good amount of cost overruns on this particular project. And so we're sitting there, we're talking about Northspyre and what it could be for them. And we're talking about this project that they're just wrapping up. And I asked the leadership, I said, hey, you had a good amount of cost overruns here. Here's your process today. You're using Excel. What's your process for getting out ahead of cost overruns, forecasting your risks, being able to see those ahead of time and proactively manage and plan for those? And I'll never forget this. The most senior member of the team looked at me and says, Ryan, to be honest with you, we don't really have a way to keep track of that today. We kind of just know about cost overruns when they happen, right? We get over budget, we get overbilled, we kind of have this oh shoot moment. They said it a little bit differently than that, but we kind of have this moment, and then we essentially react and figure out how we're going to manage that overrun, how we're going to move funds around, and how we're going to essentially deal with this issue that's just come up and been realized by the project. And then we sat down and we took a look at what Northspyre could do for them, and they were really blown away. And so for our audience here, maybe you are looking at Northspyre for the very first time. Maybe you're senior leadership on a team that's using Northspyre, but not really using it in its fullest capacity, right? Maybe you're accounting team is using it to run draws, but beyond that, leadership, senior executives are really getting into the platform. And of course, we understand that things are pretty busy in the development world. You got a lot going on. Things move pretty quickly, and it can be tough to kind of stop the normal process that you're used to and get into something new like this. But really encourage you to, number one, reach out to us, learn more about these features, and ultimately get into the platform for yourself so you can see all of this firsthand. Start using that anticipated cost report that we looked at as your day-to-day guide. Have it up in your team meetings and your meetings with your GC and your design team, and really lean on this tool as your true command center. And I promise you, it'll change the way that you do business and take your team from that reactive approach that we talked about to being more proactive, data-driven, getting out ahead of those potential risks, and ultimately maximizing the returns on your development projects. So with that, thank you so much for hanging out with us this afternoon. And I think we've got some time to open it up to some questions. So we'll see if we've got a few here. I'm just reading this here from Sean. So looks like an example for the group here of some best practices. Created an exposure invoice. It's best to keep as an exposure and reduce it. The invoice comes in, new value stays the original number. Okay, all right, so this is great. So Sean's asking a question about using exposures in the platform and sort of best practices around that. And he says, created a $50,000 exposure for civil engineering with 6 months left in the project. So we know that that's coming up. We want to keep track of that, even though we don't have a formal change order or anything just yet. We haven't been billed for it yet. We want to keep track of that exposure. And then he says, as it's invoiced over the next 6 months, is it best to keep it as an exposure and kind of reduce the exposure amount as the invoices come in and sort of keep the estimated value the same as opposed to change as invoices are accepted? Yeah, so kind of net one out against the other as the invoices come in. Yeah, Sean, that's a really, really great way to go about it. Ultimately, if you've got an exposure, and it doesn't have to be with your GC, right? You've got something with your civil engineer. Ideally, if they're running over their contract, they're sending you a change order. And so then you can take that same exposure, flip it over to a change order, and it kind of gets baked into the contract that way. But we understand in real life, it's not always that way. It doesn't always work out like that. So yeah, a really great way to use it is to kind of have that exposure there as a placeholder, and then you can sort of net out against it. And again, the big picture idea is that you always want to have that full visibility of where that cost is going to end up at the end of the job. All right, thanks so much for that question. Let's see here. Other questions from the group? I have too many other questions. Can give it another minute or two just to make sure everyone gets their questions answered. But again, if you do have questions, maybe as soon as we get off the webinar here, oh shoot, I wish I asked this type of thing. Feel free to reach out to your RETC. We're happy to talk to you about this more. And certainly if you drop any questions in the chat that we can't get to, we can follow up with you on those as well. All right, not seeing other questions come through. So with that, thank you all so much again for taking the time to hang out with us this afternoon, go through this particular topic. If you want to learn more, please reach out to your real estate transformation consultant. Be happy to talk to you about this more, help you get the most value out of the tool, and start using Northspyre to really take that proactive stance in managing your development projects. With that, I think we'll wrap up here. Thank you so much for taking the time.